So there's our theme, transformed to play. Now, Katie, when you hear that word transformed, what do you think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think you often think of something like the Transformers, you know, the wee cars that turn into sort of, I don't know, robots or people. Yeah, that kind of thing. Or like I do love like a good sort of before and after, you know, like an old house all dilapidated, and then there's the reveal at the end, and it all looks amazing.
Yes, I thought of a few things similar. Let's see, a few things I thought of with Transformers. There you go, Transformers. There you got it. Maybe you're a fan of the Transformers. I thought that kind of like the before and after, but you often get it with celebs, don't you? Look, Rebel Wilson, before and after. And then we also had, you mentioned there, the garden or the house. Look at that, the before and after, great workmanship. Transformed. But we get it in sport a little bit at times, don't we? I don't know if you saw this game, France against Switzerland, world champions. First half, terrible. They just couldn't hit a barn door. They were struggling. Half-time, they go in, they regroup, they have a conversation, come out 20 minutes of that second half, untouchable. Pogba scores an absolute screamer, but sadly they don't go on to win it. But transformed, at least, for a little bit. And our own, of course, Andy Murray. I don't know if you saw this game against Oscar Otter. First set, terrible, classic, throwing his toys out a little bit. But they take a brain break, get the roof on, he comes out transformed, Katie. Yeah. Goes on, wins it, the crowd are going wild, transformed performance. That's what we're thinking about here. What does it look like to be transformed? And I guess it's this. It's when something or someone starts in kind of one place, one condition, and is changed completely to something else, often for the better. When something or someone starts in one place, one condition, and is completely changed to another place, often for the better. That's what we're thinking of, and have that in your head when we think about this phrase, transformed to play. But how does this then relate to the Bible? Well, I said, didn't we? We're in a book called 1 Peter each morning, and we're going to be thinking about how this applies to Christianity and sport. And so we've got a little verse here up on the screen. If you could read that for us, Katie, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
Of course. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead.
Okay, one of the ways the Bible talks about kind of transformation is in this little phrase here, new birth. Can you see that? In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope. So this kind of transformation is this new birth, this new start that God gives people. That's almost what it means to become a Christian. You kind of get a new birth, a new start, a new life through Jesus. And this verse here just helps us understand a few of the things that are involved in this transformation, in this new birth. Here's 3 things I just want us to think about briefly this morning, okay? It's firstly this: God gives new birth. Secondly, God gives new birth into living hope. And then how does he do it all? He does it through Jesus. So let's just think about those 3 things really quickly together before we go out to first sport. First and foremost, God gives this. Do you see this? Praise be to the God and Father, our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us. See, when someone becomes a Christian, it's not about church attendance. It's not about keeping the rules. It's not about saying grace every mealtime. It's a gift from God that he willingly and wants to give people. It's not by our efforts, it's by his good provision. He gives it to us. And do you see that little phrase that he uses just before? Do you spot this? In his great mercy, he has given us. This is really important for us to understand, see. God wants to give us this, but actually the reality is we don't deserve it. I don't know if you're anything like me, but many times I mess things up, say stuff to people I shouldn't say, think stuff I shouldn't think. And that happens both to other people, but also towards God. We do stuff that ignores him. We do stuff that rejects him. I don't deserve this new birth. Rather, God gives it to me in his mercy. He gives me something that I don't deserve, but he wants to give me it. And this is what it says here. Despite all the rubbish stuff that I do, God is willing to put that punishment on someone else, but rather give me a new start in life. Let me tell you a little story about how this kind of new birth can really transform people. Back in 1941, there was the big disaster, the big attack on Pearl Harbor. I don't know if you've maybe seen that film, where the Japanese flew into Pearl Harbor and dropped bombs and caused real devastation. Well, about 4 months later, the Americans, full of anger and rage, want to retaliate. And they started off with a little secret mission with about 16 men flying planes over Japan, dropping bombs. And right at the heart of that was a man who was full of bitterness and anger called Jake DeSaja. He flew over, dropped bombs, and the plan was to fly over into China, eject, and then escape. But sadly, as he lands into China, the Japanese capture him, put him into prison in Tokyo, and he's tortured there. But whilst he's in there, they've just thrown different books and things that they can find just to give him, I guess, a little bit of something to read. And he discovers a Bible. And over a long period of time in this prison, he starts to read the Bible, and he starts to read things like this. And he comes to a place where he says, I believe it, and I trust it. In that moment, and as a couple of years go on, his life starts to completely transform. The anger, the rage, all starts to disappear, and instead what is replaced is a love for people, to the point where he had a love for the Japanese. And he wanted to actually start telling them about the way Jesus transformed his life. So he goes into Japan, and he starts giving out leaflets telling people his story. And he gives a leaflet to a man, let me get this right, called Mituzo Fuchida. And about 5 years after the first Pearl Harbor attack, this man picks up Jake's leaflet and starts reading about his story. Do you know what's so remarkable about this story? This man here, Mituzo Fuchida, he was the first plane that flew into Pearl Harbor. He dropped the first bomb in Pearl Harbor. As he hears Jake DeSaja's story, he comes to a realization that he needs God's mercy, and he trusts it. And his life starts to be transformed. His anger and his bitterness towards the Americans starts to change. And here's a picture of them reading the Bible together. And for the years on, they're great friends, and they start telling everyone about the love of Jesus. This is, of course, quite an extreme story, I realize, but a story that just captures a little bit, doesn't it, of the mercy of God, how he can transform people's lives, and this new birth that he can give people. So God gives it. But what does he give specifically? Well, the next bit was this, wasn't it? Living hope. Now, Katie, when you hear that word hope, what do you think of?
Well, I've got a friend who's got a little girl called Hope, so
Yes,
I probably immediately
maybe you
think
know
of her.
someone called Hope, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think of like, I suppose if you're hoping for something, you're just really like wanting something to happen. So like I'm hoping that Laura Muir will get a gold at Tokyo.
Yes.
I was really hoping that Scotland would win the Euros.
Yeah.
That was a real hope. Yeah, so I suppose it's like really,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like this kind of feeling.
Yeah, very good. You look forward, don't you? And most of the time, you're looking forward to something better. You want something to happen. You want something to improve. Good weather, winning team challenge, all these things. You hope. It's a desire, it's an emotion, isn't it? Well, the verse is saying here that God gives living hope. What does that hope actually mean then? Well, of course, it's linked to this. God is wanting people to have a better life, a fuller life, a richer life. But he's also given them hope that what we live in now isn't all to come. This isn't just it. There's something better to look forward to. And the Bible, of course, talks about life now, but it also talks about the future, a place called heaven, a place where there's no more pain or suffering or sickness, no more policemen, no more alarms, no more funeral directors, because there's no more death, there's no more sorrow, there's no more crime. That's one of the hopes that God gives us, a hope of heaven. But you see how it was described? It was called a living hope. So what do you think of when you think of the word living, Katie?
Living. Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose you immediately think of like the opposite being death.
Yes.
So where there is no life, whereas living, I suppose you maybe think of like growth. You think of sort of vitality.
Yeah. It's active, isn't it? It's an
Active, yeah.
active word. You're breathing, we're living. Sean got us to do it last night, didn't he? And everyone seems to be here this morning, which is good. So living is something that's kind of active and present, and it's certain, isn't it? I mean, we're pretty clear you're alive. We're pretty certain you're alive. You're living right now. Well, that's an important word here, living hope. Because it's not just hope like wishful thinking. Living means it's certain, it's concrete, it's real, it's living hope. So the hope that Jesus can give, that the Bible talks about, is something that you can be really assured of, and you can know that it is true and it is certain. And that's what he says here in the verse. In his great mercy, God has given us new birth into a living hope, a certain, real, concrete hope of a new life, now and in the future. But how is it all made possible? Here's our last point. Stick with us. Here we go. Third point. Through Jesus. New birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Here's the great story of the Bible. It's all about God's Son, Jesus. We're going to be looking at him in the evenings. I'm excited for it. But how is this all made possible? Because he was the one who came down to earth, took the punishment that we should have got so that we instead get God's mercy, but he doesn't stay dead. He smashes through death and he comes alive, and it's through his resurrection into a new life that he makes it possible that anyone who trusts in him can walk the same path into this new life with him. See, Jesus is ultimately the one, Katie, who will transform us, because he was the one who he walked the earth, he died for us, he rose again, and he promises to trust. So see it there. New birth into a living hope. How? Through the resurrection of Jesus. Look, if Jesus stayed dead, none of this makes sense. The punishment, I don't know if it really deals with it all. Heaven, I don't know if it can be certain. If Jesus stays dead, all of this falls apart. Yet if Jesus is alive, it changes everything. It gives us new birth into a living hope. It transforms us. So Katie, what's your journey been like? How has Jesus transformed your life?
Yeah, well, I think, well, in so many ways over the years. I think for me it's been just an ongoing process. I grew up knowing about Jesus, and I suppose he became more real as I grew up. I think just about in every area of life, I think maybe a lot of it to do with knowing who I am. I think not becoming less dependent on my performance, less dependent on feeling like my worth was tied to things that I could do or things that I couldn't do. I think that would be a massive area, and just changing some of my own motivations, for my reasons for doing things, giving me a new reason actually for wanting to do my best.
Yeah, amazing.
For him.
Amazing. I remember a really vivid moment where Jesus transformed my life. Sports Plus in Wales, Brecon. I was 13. I sat on the grass after first sport rugby with the rugby coach. And after hearing quite a lot of this stuff over the course of the week, I just wanted Jesus to transform my life. And I remember sitting there and praying with Chris Jones, the Welsh rugby coach. He was mean, but he loved Jesus. And he helped me take my first steps into letting Jesus into my heart, who has transformed me from that day going forward. This is the new birth. This is what it means to be transformed. But how does this actually then work itself out in sport? What does it mean then to be transformed to play? Well, remember that word was living? Yeah, that meant it's active, it's real, yeah. So it makes a difference now. It's not something kind of you just check in and that's done and then you wait. It's living and it's real. And here's what we're going to look at now as the rest of the week goes on, is how this living hope, how this transformed life really starts to apply to our sport. So I'm just going to show you one thing quickly now before you go out to first sport, and then Katie and myself for the rest of the week will help us understand it. A little bit later on in the same chapter, we hit verses 13 to 16. Katie, if you could read this for us, that would be really helpful.
Great. Therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, So be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy.
Thanks so much. Right, I want you to do something with me. Trust me on this, okay? Close your eyes. Right, think of your sport. Think of yourself competing in that sport, and think of yourself winning it, whatever that is. Crossing the line, final whistle going, lifting the trophy, okay? Now in that moment, I want you to think of yourself at all the different things that you've done in the run-up to getting yourself there, yeah? The training sessions that you might have done. Go on, picture it. Can you put yourself in the pool, on the pitch, on the bike? Now think of maybe some of the kit that you've bought over the years to get there. Boots, shin pads, swim stuff, bikes, hockey sticks, balls, whatever it is. Now go about kind of an hour before the start of that competition, yeah? Put yourself there in the moment. Warm up. You're going through your warm up. Maybe you're thinking through the different moves that you're going to do if you're in a sport which requires that. Now think of maybe the team talk from the coach or from your parents. Think of all those sessions that you've done. And now put yourself back in that moment in the sport. You've won it. Right, open your mind, open your eyes. What have we just done for a split second? You've just used your mind, haven't you? You've just thought about something, and in some ways you've just started to kind of prepare your minds for action. Coaches, they're all set for you, by the way, now. They're all raring to go for sport. You've used your mind, and in some ways you've thought back, and then you've prepared. And I'm sure now if you were really going to go forward and take your sport seriously, this is something you might be encouraged to do by coaches, is think, to be psychologically involved and invested in your sport as well as physically and emotionally. Well, see what Peter's saying here. Therefore, he says, because you've been transformed to play, prepare your minds for action. Look, being a Christian will involve you to step forward in faith, to walk the path in front of you, whether that be at school, sports clubs, home life. And he's saying that you've got to prepare your minds for action. You've got to think about what that's going to involve. But what this now does is it allows you to live a different life. Jesus transformed you and promises to transform you to live a different life. And so spot some of the things now that he says we can do. Prepare your minds for action. Look, be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. So as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy. Do you see that? Be self-controlled. Don't conform. Be holy. These are some of the things he's saying here that you now are able to do in your sport. You don't have to follow the crowd. You don't have to just do stuff because everyone else is doing it. Jesus will transform you and help you to be different in that moment. Be self-controlled. You don't have to just shoot through the roof with anger or frustration or bitterness. And he says, be holy. Not because you have to, because you get to. And because Jesus, who was holy, is in you. And he'll help you to be holy. My sport's rugby. Proud Welshman, part of Stuart's Melville Rugby Club in Edinburgh. No one boo, please. It's a wonderful club. Here's one of the ways I think this starts to transform rugby, okay, in my context. Rugby's a physical sport, Katie. It's often got quite a bit of aggression to it. And of course, one of the laws of the game is to tackle the opponent. And coaches from time to time might kind of use that as a way of motivating players before, but they'll push it to the real extreme. So they'll say stuff like, listen, tackle them so they'll never want to run into you ever again. Or they might say to them, look, if they're on the floor, just give them a little stamp on the hand. Go on, make them know that you're here. There's an over-aggression. There's an unnecessary aggression that's encouraged. Well, look what he's saying here with Peter. I don't need to do that. I don't need to push it too far. I can be self-controlled. Now, it's challenging. Of course, I want to please my coach and I want to contribute. But I can still tackle hard and fair, but I don't have to go too far. I don't have to be over-aggressive. I don't have to follow just what the culture of rugby says. That's one of the ways this transformation can start to take place in my sport. And I wonder what that looks like for you in your sport. So, we're transformed to play. And I've got a little action for us to remember. Okay, so transformed, I want us to do like a transformed, you know. It's like some sort of soup. Transformed. And then to play, you can do whatever your sport is, just sat on your seat, all right? So swim, tennis, hockey, football, you get the gist, yeah? So transformed to play. And when we say to play, do your sport. Okay. Should you have a go at it? Okay, 3, 2, 1, transformed to play. I think you and I were the only ones who said that. You can speak in a mask, all right? It's all right. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, transformed to play. Let's one more time. 1, 3, 2, 1, transformed to play. There we are. That's what we're thinking about now. As you go out into your first sport, what does it look like to be transformed by Jesus to go and play that for him and maximize all your abilities?